How do you catch a thief? You leave out a priceless looking piece of jewelry that's actually a tracker. How do you dismantle a business rival who operates in the shadows, stealing your hard work and rebranding it as her own? You don't just set a trap, you build a gilded cage, a magnificent, beautiful, multi-million dollar prison of their own making, and you hand them the key. You watch them lock themselves inside, convinced they've just stormed the castle. This, according to but deeply sourced reports, is the story of how Amy Roloff, the quiet matriarch of a television dynasty, just bankrupted her biggest rival, Caryn Chandler, using a single, devastatingly brilliant and entirely fake idea. This wasn't just business, it was a masterclass in corporate warfare, a poison pill strategy so ruthless and so perfectly executed, it will be whispered about in business circles for years to come. This story is a labyrinth of ambition, betrayal, and calculated revenge that has been building for years, hidden just beneath the surface of the happy family farm facade. If you want to understand the intricate details of this corporate takedown and get exclusive updates on the fallout, you need to be part of this community. Before we dive into the deep end, take a second to hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you don't miss the next bombshell, and press the like button to help us get this incredible story out there. You won't want to miss a single word. To understand the genius of Amy's trap, you first have to understand the foundational lie that has been poisoning the Roloff family dynamic for the better part of a decade. It's a lie Caryn Chandler told herself and then tried to sell to the world. The lie that she was the true business visionary behind Roloff Farms and that Amy's post-divorce success was nothing more than a fluke, a lucky break for a woman who was supposedly just a housewife. For years, insiders have spoken of Caryn's deep-seated professional jealousy. While she was Matt Roloff's employee and later his partner, she watched as Amy built a small but passionate following. Amy's brand, Amy Roloff's Little Kitchen, was authentic. It was born from her own passions, her own recipes, her own identity separate from the farm. It was a genuine grassroots success. And to someone like Caryn, who was trying to build her own identity on the foundation of the Roloff name, that independent success was an intolerable thorn in her side. The pattern began subtly. It was a whisper campaign of imitation, a slow and steady appropriation of Amy's brand identity. An insider who worked on the farm during this period described it as a shadow campaign. Amy would release a new seasonal salsa, and within a few months, the farm's official store, which Caryn had increasing influence over, would promote a new pumpkin chili that used suspiciously similar flavor profiles. Amy would post about hosting an intimate fall-themed dinner party for her friends, and the next season, the farm would launch a high-priced harvest supper experience with marketing language that mirrored Amy's own heartfelt social media posts. Caryn was trying to prove she could do what Amy did, but better, bigger, and more profitably. She was trying to overwrite Amy's legacy with her own, using the very ground Amy had cultivated for 30 years as her stage. The foundational lie wasn't just a private belief, it was a business strategy. Caryn believed that if she could replicate Amy's success, she could retroactively claim credit for the original, positioning herself as the true lifestyle and hospitality guru of the Roloff empire. But Amy Roloff is not naive. She is a woman who has navigated the treacherous waters of reality television, a messy public divorce, and the complexities of a multi-million-dollar family business for decades. She sees more than she lets on. The small coincidences, the mirrored ideas, the slightly too similar branding, they weren't lost on her. At first, she might have brushed it off as coincidence or even a twisted form of flattery. But then the incidents became more specific, more targeted, and more alarming. A source extremely close to Amy's small business circle recounts a pivotal moment. Amy had been developing a new product line, a series of artisanal baking mixes. The project was in its infancy, discussed only with her two most trusted team members. The idea was to create a high-end, gluten-free line, tapping into a niche market. Less than a month after these confidential brainstorming sessions, a well-known food blogger with documented social ties to Caryn posted a lengthy article musing about the untapped market for a luxury gluten-free baking brand, and specifically mentioned how a place like Roloff Farms would be the perfect launchpad for such a venture. The post was vague enough to be deniable, but the timing and specificity were a blaring alarm bell for Amy. It was a shot across the bow. Another incident, according to our insider, involved a promotional strategy for her cookbook. Amy's team had devised a unique golden ticket style giveaway, a concept they workshopped in a private Zoom meeting. The plan was to insert 5 signed certificates into books sold online, granting the winners a private cooking lesson with Amy. It was a secret, high-value marketing hook. 2 weeks before Amy's launch, Roloff Farms announced a Golden Gourd contest for pumpkin season, where 5 pumpkins would be marked with a special symbol, granting the finders a VIP tour with Matt and Caryn. The core concept was identical. The leak was no longer a suspicion. It was a statistical certainty. Someone inside her small trusted circle was feeding information to her biggest rival. This was the point where many would simply fire the suspected employee, change the locks, and try to move on. But Amy Roloff, we are learning, plays chess, not checkers. The personal betrayal, the sting of knowing someone she trusted was working against her, was undoubtedly painful. But that pain was channeled not into emotional reaction, but into cold, hard strategy. She realized that the leak wasn't just a vulnerability. It was a weapon. It was a direct private channel into her rival's headquarters. She could control the information Caryn received. She could use Caryn's own ambition and her pattern of imitation against her. She wasn't just going to plug the leak. She was going to poison the well. The idea for the ultimate sting operation was born. A plan to not only expose the mole and stop the theft of her ideas, but to use Caryn's own arrogance to lead her into a self-inflicted financial catastrophe. This brings us to the architect of deception, the moment Amy transitioned from victim to strategist. She understood that to make the trap work, the bait had to be irresistible. It had to be an idea so big, so flashy, and so perfectly tailored to Caryn's specific ambitions that she would leap at it without a second thought. And so Amy and a single, completely loyal consultant working in total secrecy created 2 business plans. The first was her real project. Sources indicate this was a smart, scalable, and relatively low overhead venture, a subscription box service called Amy's Little Kitchen Pantry. The concept was brilliant in its simplicity. A curated quarterly box featuring one of her signature food products, a new kitchen gadget she endorsed, and exclusive recipe cards. It required minimal new infrastructure, leveraged her existing brand, built a recurring revenue stream, and could be run from anywhere. It was a modern, agile, and highly profitable business model. It was the move of a seasoned entrepreneur. Then there was the second plan, the poison pill. It was a masterpiece of corporate fiction, a Trojan horse disguised as a golden goose. The file was labeled Project Gastropub, the Roloff Farm Legacy Experience. On the surface, the plan was a work of art. It was a 50-page proposal, complete with glossy architectural renderings, detailed floor plans, and a tantalizing executive summary. It proposed converting one of the older, more picturesque barns on Roloff Farms into a high-end gastropub. The concept was intoxicating, a true farm-to-table restaurant where diners could eat a gourmet meal just yards from where the ingredients were grown. It envisioned craft beers with names like the Wedding Barn Wheat and Big Boys Porter, an outdoor patio with fire pits overlooking the pumpkin patch, and a menu designed by a fictional, award-winning Portland chef. It was everything Caryn ever wanted: a permanent, high-profile, hospitality-focused landmark on the farm that would forever cement her status as its new matriarch. It was the perfect bait. But beneath the glittering surface, Amy had woven a web of intricate, almost invisible financial and logistical impossibilities. These were not obvious red flags. They were subtle, deeply embedded flaws that only someone with decades of hands-on experience with the farm or a competent business consultant would ever spot. First, there was the issue of zoning and permits. The plan's budget allocated a mere $50,000 for permits. Amy knew from years of battling with the county over events as simple as pumpkin season parking that rezoning agricultural land for a full-service restaurant with a liquor license was a multi-year, multi-million-dollar legal war. It was a bureaucratic nightmare she had personally navigated and knew to avoid at all costs. Caryn, whose experience was primarily in management and not in the gritty foundational work of the farm's legal establishment, would see a line item, not a labyrinth. Second was the supply chain fallacy. The business plan boasted that 90% of all produce would be sourced directly from Roloff Farms, a key selling point for the farm-to-table concept. The financial projections were based on this near-zero cost for ingredients. But Amy knew the farm's actual output. It was a seasonal, limited operation. The plan's projected customer volume would require a supply of produce 10 times what the farm could ever hope to produce, even in its best year. The restaurant would be forced to buy the vast majority of its ingredients from expensive external suppliers, completely obliterating the sham profit margins Amy had so carefully crafted in the proposal. The very core of the business model was a lie. Third, the financial projections themselves were a work of malicious fiction. Amy projected a first-year profit margin of 38%. The national average for a new restaurant, a notoriously brutal industry, is between 3 and 5% if they're lucky enough to turn a profit at all. She inflated projected visitor numbers, applying the massive crowds of the 6-week pumpkin season across all 12 months of the year, a ludicrous assumption anyone familiar with the farm's traffic patterns would instantly recognize. But to an outsider or an insider blinded by ambition, the numbers looked spectacular. They promised a quick and massive return on investment. And the final, most diabolical trap was the choice of location. The plan specified the historic West Barn as the site for the gastro pub, praising its rustic charm and sweeping views. The architectural renderings made it look like a simple, elegant renovation. What Amy knew, and what was not in any public record, was that the West Barn's foundation was failing. She and Matt had received a private engineering report years ago, stating the structure was compromised and would require a complete teardown and a multi-million-dollar rebuild to be made commercially viable. The renovation budget of $750,000 in the fake plan wouldn't even cover the demolition. The entire construction premise was built on a catastrophic sinkhole. It was a plan designed not just to fail, but to fail spectacularly, to hemorrhage money at every stage, from permits to construction to operation. Now that the trap was designed, Amy had to bait it. This is where the internal betrayal comes into focus. Sources inside Amy's company have identified the mole as a junior marketing assistant. Let's call her Jessica. Jessica was young, ambitious, and felt chronically underappreciated. She saw herself as a creative force, but her job mostly consisted of scheduling social media posts and responding to customer emails. She watched Amy's success and felt entitled to a bigger piece of it. Caryn Chandler, a master of identifying and exploiting insecurity, had reportedly been cultivating Jessica for months. It started with compliments on her Instagram, then a friendly coffee, then lunches. Caryn made Jessica feel seen. She dangled the promise of a future, a senior executive role in the new Roloff hospitality empire she was planning to build. She painted a picture of a glamorous future, a stark contrast to Jessica's mundane reality. Caryn wasn't just asking for information, she was selling a dream, and Jessica, desperate for recognition, was an eager buyer. The leak itself was executed with theatrical precision. Amy, knowing Jessica was the mole, began to stage a series of calculated mistakes. She held a loud, seemingly confidential phone call about the gastropub project's incredible potential, while Jessica was within earshot. Then came the final move. One Friday afternoon, Amy accidentally uploaded the entire Project Gastropub folder to a shared company server that she knew Jessica had access to, a folder that was supposed to be in her private secure drive. She then sent a company-wide email announcing she was heading out early for a long weekend, a trip to see her grandkids. The bait was in the water. According to a source who later spoke with a distraught Jessica, the young assistant saw the folder appear and her heart nearly stopped. This was it. This was the big one. This was the inside information Caryn had been pressing her for, the key that would unlock her promised future. With trembling hands, she copied the entire folder to a USB drive, a 50-page document filled with dazzling promises and hidden time bombs. She immediately contacted Caryn. The trap was sprung. The poison pill had been swallowed. For Caryn Chandler, receiving that USB drive was the ultimate validation. It was, in her mind, concrete proof of the foundational lie she had built her ambitions upon. She saw the brilliantly conceived gastropub plan and believed it confirmed her long-held conviction. Amy had good ideas, but was too timid, too unsophisticated, too much of a home cook to execute on a grand scale. Caryn saw herself as the closer, the one with the business savvy and the ruthlessness to take a concept and turn it into a multi-million-dollar reality. Her hubris, a trait Amy had banked on, was her undoing. She was so blinded by her rivalry, so eager to prove she was the superior businesswoman, that she committed the cardinal sin of any serious entrepreneur. She failed to do her due diligence. She didn't question the 38% profit margin. She didn't call the County Planning Commission to inquire about zoning on agricultural land. She didn't consult an independent structural engineer about the West Barn. She didn't analyze the farm's real-world supply chain capabilities. She saw what she wanted to see, a brilliant, stolen plan that she could claim as her own. She reportedly presented the idea to Matt Roloff, who, as a builder and a man of grand projects, was instantly enamored by the construction aspect. He loved the idea of transforming a barn into a landmark. His enthusiasm likely served as the only validation Caryn needed, creating an echo chamber of confirmation bias. With Matt's excitement fueling her own, Caryn moved to the next phase with breathtaking speed, securing the capital to build her stolen dream. This is where the story turns from a private rivalry into a public spectacle of high-stakes finance. Caryn, armed with Amy's beautifully crafted but deeply fraudulent business plan, began pitching to potential investors. These weren't just local business owners. Reports suggest she targeted private equity groups and wealthy individuals from the Portland area, people who were familiar with the Roloff brand's television fame, but not with the farm's operational realities. And this is where we find the core smoking gun evidence of this entire saga, a series of leaked emails between Caryn Chandler and her potential financial backers. These emails, which are now rumored to be the centerpiece of a looming legal battle, paint a damning picture. In one email, Caryn writes, "As you can see from my proprietary financial modeling, the Roloff Farm Gastropub is projected to achieve a 38% net profit margin within the first fiscal year, a figure driven by our unique vertical integration of produce supply. She calls the projections my proprietary financial modeling, a direct fraudulent claim of ownership over Amy's fabricated numbers. She's not just presenting the plan, she's claiming authorship of its every detail. Another email sent to a different investor confidently addresses the construction. The renovation of the historic West Barn is a straightforward capital improvement, budgeted at $750,000. My team has assessed the structure, and we are confident this figure is accurate. This statement is a ticking time bomb. It's a direct misrepresentation of the building's condition, a falsehood that will have catastrophic financial consequences. She was repeating, almost verbatim, the lies Amy had written, confidently presenting them as her own well-researched facts. Blinded by the fame of the Roloff name in Caryn's polished, confident presentation, the investors took the bait. They saw the dazzling projections, the beloved family farm location, and they saw a quick, massive return. They didn't dig deeper. Why would they? They were being pitched by the partner of the farm's owner, using what appeared to be a meticulously detailed and professional business plan. Millions of dollars began to pour into Caryn's new corporation. Deals were signed. Contracts were executed. Caryn was triumphant. She had done it. She had outsmarted Amy, secured the funding, and was about to break ground on a project that would finally and forever establish her as the true business visionary of Roloff Farms. The public announcement was a grand affair. A major lifestyle magazine was given the exclusive. The article featured glossy photos of Caryn and Matt on the farm, pointing to architectural drawings of the future gastropub. Caryn was quoted extensively, talking about my lifelong dream to bring a world-class culinary experience to the farm, and a concept I've been developing for years. She was taking a victory lap before the race had even begun. And all the while, from her own little kitchen, Amy Roloff watched. She saw the magazine articles. She heard the celebratory buzz. She said nothing. She simply waited. She had built the perfect trap, baited it, and watched her target walk right in. Now, all she had to do was wait for the sound of the trap snapping shut. Caryn was at the absolute peak of her perceived success, standing on the edge of a financial cliff she couldn't even see, and Amy Roloff had just handed her a blindfold and a gentle push. The spectacular failure was not a question of if, but when. The first sign of trouble wasn't a thunderclap. It was the quiet, grinding friction of bureaucracy. The gastropub plan, which had looked so sleek and frictionless on paper, slammed into the brick wall of Washington County's Planning and Zoning Department. The $50,000 line item for permitting in Amy's fake budget, a figure Caryn had confidently repeated to her investors, was exhausted within the first 3 weeks on legal retainers alone. The county officials were not impressed by the Roloff name or the glossy renderings. They saw an agricultural zoned property attempting a complex commercial conversion that involved a new septic system, major water line alterations, and a highly coveted liquor license. Each of those was a separate beastly process. An insider at the county office described the initial meetings as a rude awakening for Caryn's team. They came in expecting a rubber stamp and were handed a stack of paperwork a foot high, with a projected timeline not of weeks but of 18 to 24 months, with no guarantees of success. The cost of the required environmental impact studies, traffic analyses, and public hearings alone was projected to be in the low six figures. The project was already bleeding money before a single shovel had hit the ground. Matt Roloff, a man used to building what he wanted on his own land, was reportedly furious, bogged down in a type of red tape he couldn't simply bulldoze through. Caryn, meanwhile, was forced to go back to her investors, cap in hand, for the first of what would be many unforeseen capital calls. She framed it as a minor delay, a bit of small-town politics, but the seed of doubt had been planted. While the permit war was being waged in council meetings and law offices, Caryn, desperate to show progress, made a fateful decision to begin preliminary work on the West Barn. The logic was to get the site shovel-ready so that the moment the permits were approved, construction could begin in earnest. They would start with interior demolition and a structural assessment. This was the moment the subtle, hidden flaws in Amy's plan gave way to a catastrophic, undeniable reality. The demolition crew was inside the barn for less than a day before they stopped work. A foreman, a man who had built barns for 40 years, made an urgent call to the project manager. The main support beams, he said, were compromised by rot and termites. The foundation, a mix of old fieldstone and crumbling mortar, was visibly sinking on the north side. The structure wasn't just old, it was actively unsafe. An emergency team of structural engineers was called in. Their report, delivered a week later, was a death sentence for Caryn's budget and her dream. The West Barn, the charming rustic centerpiece of the entire gastropub concept, could not be renovated. It was a tear down. The foundation was unsalvageable. To build a commercial-grade restaurant on that spot would require a complete demolition, excavation, and the pouring of a new multi-million-dollar foundation and support structure. The $750,000 renovation budget was a fantasy. The real cost to simply create a safe, buildable site would be closer to $3 million, and that was before a single wall of the new restaurant was even framed. The news hit Caryn's camp like a shockwave. The project was now facing not just a 6-figure legal delay, but a 7-figure construction disaster. The total project cost had effectively tripled before it had even begun. Panic set in. According to a source close to the project, the meetings between Caryn, Matt, and the investors became increasingly tense and accusatory. The investors wanted to know how a structural assessment, which Caryn had claimed in her emails had already been done, could have missed this. Caryn, with no good answer, reportedly tried to shift the blame, suggesting the demolition crew had been reckless or that the initial engineers she never actually hired were incompetent. But the facts were undeniable, written in the crumbling mortar of the West Barn's foundation. Her credibility was shattering. It was during this chaotic period that the mole, Jessica, began to understand the true nature of her situation. She wasn't a future executive in a thriving new company. She was a low-level accomplice in a financial train wreck. She read the increasingly panicked articles in the local business journals. She heard the whispers of lawsuits from angry investors, and she was terrified. Her promised high-paying job was a mirage, and in its place was the very real possibility of being named in a fraud investigation. She frantically tried to contact Caryn, looking for reassurance for the promised protection. But the Caryn who had once wooed her with compliments and promises of a glamorous future was gone. In her place was a desperate, defensive woman who saw Jessica not as a partner, but as a liability. According to text messages later provided as evidence, Caryn's tone shifted from friendly to dismissive and then to openly hostile. When Jessica expressed her fear about the project collapsing, Caryn allegedly texted back, "This is a high-level business. Things get complicated. You need to stay quiet and trust the process." When Jessica mentioned the investors in the word fraud, Caryn's response was ice cold. "You were never an employee. You were an informant. We have no formal relationship. Don't contact me again." That was the moment Jessica realized she had been used and was about to be discarded. Caryn had cut her loose. The dream Caryn had sold her had turned into a personal nightmare, and she was completely alone. Driven by a mix of terror and a desperate need for self-preservation, Jessica made the one move she had left. She went to Amy. It was not an easy decision. She was confessing to a woman she had betrayed, a woman whose entire business strategy she had tried to help sabotage. A source close to Amy describes the scene as profoundly dramatic. Jessica showed up at Amy's house unannounced, distraught, and in tears. She confessed everything. She told Amy about how Caryn had cultivated her, flattered her, and made promises she never intended to keep. She admitted to copying the gastropub plan from the shared server and giving it to Caryn. And then she produced her phone. She handed it to Amy and showed her the entire text message history with Caryn Chandler. The initial flattery, the request for inside information, the explicit promises of a job in exchange for corporate secrets, and finally, the cold, brutal dismissal. It was all there in black and white. Amy now had the smoking gun. She had the mole, the confession, and irrefutable time-stamped proof of Caryn's conspiracy to commit corporate espionage. Amy Roloff's response was not one of emotional outburst or triumphant gloating. It was the calm, collected action of a strategist who had just received the final piece of her puzzle. She listened to Jessica's entire story. Then she made a call, not to the press, not to Matt, but to a senior partner at one of Portland's most aggressive corporate law firms. The game had entered its final and most brutal phase. As Caryn's gastropub venture publicly imploded, with construction halted and rumors of insolvency swirling, the first legal bombshell dropped. It came from the investors. They filed a massive lawsuit in civil court against Caryn Chandler and her newly formed LLC, alleging investor fraud, negligent misrepresentation, and breach of fiduciary duty. Their lawsuit quoted directly from Caryn's emails, citing her claims of proprietary financial modeling and her confident assertions about the straightforward renovation. They argued that she had presented a business plan she either knew was fraudulent or had failed to perform even the most basic due diligence on. The lawsuit not only sought the return of their multi-million-dollar investment, but also punitive damages. The filing triggered an immediate investigation by the state's Financial Securities Division, raising the terrifying prospect of criminal charges for defrauding investors. Caryn was now fighting for her financial life on one front, facing a phalanx of high-priced lawyers who wanted their clients' money back. But that was just the opening salvo. A week later, the second bombshell hit, and this one was aimed not just at Caryn's wallet, but at her very identity. Amy Roloff's lawyers filed their own civil suit. This wasn't about money, though they were asking for millions in damages. This was about destruction. The lawsuit was for corporate espionage, theft of intellectual property, tortious interference, and unfair business competition. The legal filing laid out the entire story in meticulous, excruciating detail. It described the pattern of imitation, the cultivation of the mole, and the outright theft of a business plan. The centerpiece of the lawsuit was Jessica's sworn affidavit and the complete transcript of her text messages with Caryn. Amy's lawyers argued that it didn't matter that the business plan was fake. The crime was in the act of stealing it. They argued that Caryn had built her entire business strategy on a foundation of theft, and Amy had the proof. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Caryn Chandler was now being sued from two different directions. Her investors were trying to claw back their money, and her rival was systematically dismantling her reputation. The legal fees alone were astronomical, reportedly forcing her and Matt to take out a significant mortgage against the farm, putting the entire Roloff legacy at risk to pay for a mess of Caryn's own making. The glossy magazine articles that had once celebrated her as a visionary now looked like monuments to hubris and deceit. Her name, which she had worked so hard to elevate, became synonymous with failure and fraud in the Portland business community. The half-demolished West Barn sat on the farm like a tombstone, a constant, visible reminder of her spectacular downfall. And what of Amy Roloff? Amidst the legal chaos and the public implosion of her rival, she made a quiet announcement on her Amy Roloff's Little Kitchen Instagram page. She was officially launching her new venture. the pantry subscription box. There was no magazine exclusive, no grand press conference, just a simple, authentic post from Amy, standing in her own kitchen, smiling as she packed the very first boxes herself. The box contained a jar of her new Marionberry jam, a custom-designed spatula, and 2 recipe cards from her personal collection. It was a small, smart, and deeply personal project. It sold out its entire quarterly inventory in less than 6 hours. Her real business plan, built on authenticity and a direct connection with her audience, was a runaway success from day one, while the fake one, built on ego and deceit, had caused a multi-million-dollar disaster. The contrast could not have been more stark or more telling. Amy had not only protected her business, she had exposed her rival's entire fraudulent premise. She had proven, in the most definitive way possible, who the real businesswoman was. She did it not by yelling louder or fighting dirtier in public, but by building a better trap. It was a ruthless, calculated, and devastatingly effective move that neutralized her biggest competitor and solidified her own brand for years to come. So the question remains, and it's one that will be debated by fans and business experts for a long time. Was this a genius business move, a necessary act of self-defense against a corporate thief? Or was it a step too far, a cold and cruel act of revenge that intentionally led someone to financial ruin? Amy Roloff played the long game, and she won decisively. But the cost of that victory was the complete and total demolition of Caryn Chandler's ambitions. Was this justice, or was it a ruthless execution? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And make sure you are subscribed, because the fallout from these lawsuits is far from over, and we will be here to cover every single development.